And welcome to everybody who's joining today. I see we have a nice group. We're going to go through three major things today, looking at information management systems for case management. The first thing that we're going to look at is data modeling. How do we understand the data that's involved in a case management system? Um, we'll look at some templates that we have available to help you get started. Then we'll look at customizing roles and access to the data, as data security for a case management system is, of course, super important. And finally, we'll look at some of ActivityInfo's built-in reporting and analysis tools that will help you drive more impact for the people that you're working with and for. All right. So let's first talk a little bit about data modeling. And what I mean by that is what is the information that we need to support our caseworkers, and how do we structure the relationships between those pieces of information. So let's start with what for I think ActivityInfo is a pretty standard case model, where each new case that might be an individual or an incident is represented as a form, as a form, and then we have subforms. You might add subforms for different types of incidents, for different types of um, repeating information or specific information, followed by a case closure form. So there might also be a form, for example. These are like one-to-many relationships, right? So one case could have several general protection incidents, or one case could have several case updates or referrals. We'll look at this in concretely in a moment. But this basically allows you to keep collecting information within kind of the umbrella of a single case. And then your case form is kind of bringing all of that information together in one line, so you can see the status of the case, how many days has it been open, etc. But this is not the only way to structure case management. In some other contexts, you might have many teams providing services to the same group of people or to the same cases. And so in this way, your structure might look quite different, because, for example, you might have a single individual, and then one team that's doing an assessment of that case, another team that's providing distributions, like a distribution of goods or supplies, food to individuals, and finally an education program, which in itself has a whole structure of, like, okay, a person gets enrolled in the education program, and then they get enrolled in a series of classes that are linked to teachers and to schools. So in this diagram, this is driven really by what information do you need. Like, if you, for the purposes of monitoring and evaluation, need to know how each of your cases are performing in an education context, then you'll need to track the classes, right? So you need to know, okay, they graduated from basic vocational skills and entered advanced vocational skills, or they took a class um, on language, or so whatever is relevant in that context, to see, yeah, are they progressing as we would like through the skills that they need to develop. um, Now, if you were looking to measure the effectiveness of your teachers or different schools, then you would further need to link those classes to teachers and schools. It really depends on how you're measuring your work, and what information you also need to administer your work, right? So maybe you say, well, I'm not really interested in measuring individual teacher performance, but I do need to provide each teacher with a list of their students. Well, then you need that relationship. Then you need that extra data. So data modeling is really an essential step in defining what information do you need, what information do different stakeholders need. That might be for monitoring and evaluation. That might be for the actual service delivery. You might need this distribution list to send to the team that loads up the trucks, right? And what information do you need for caseworkers to make sure that an individual gets the care and service that they need. If you're doing referrals, right, you might need to link a case to an external partner so that that partner can get information to the access that they need. All of these things are important considerations. So I'll give a final example that's quite different from these first two. And this is one that I saw recently, structure that a user of ours created, where you had what they were really interested in doing was identifying the needs of survivors and getting those needs followed up on. So they created actually 4 levels of subforms, so that you have at the heart an incident, which might be there was an episode of violent crime or a violent attack, which then had several survivors, right? You might have a list of 10 survivors of that attack. And then each of those survivors might have separate needs. So they might have housing needs, they might have health needs, they might have just basic cash needs, income needs to see them through this period of recovery. And then each of these needs is then referred to another service provider. And with this structure, you can really follow up and make sure that each of the needs is met for each of the survivors. So, the structure that you need, you can certainly start with some good templates, but it's going to depend a lot on the your particular context. All right, and I hope we'll have time at the end to have some time for questions, and if you have some doubts or uh, yeah, if you're weighing different approaches or not sure where to start, we can look at some specific cases. Okay, so this is in the abstract, right? 3 separate models as examples: a kind of standard case model, multi-team case management, and this incident referral. Um, let's go to Activity Info and look at a couple of these templates and see how this plays out in practice. All right, so Aruj, you're going to have to help me to make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Am I sharing a tab or a window? Do you see the Activity Info database? Okay. Let me start a new share. Okay. So can you see Activity Info now? Okay. So I'm actually going to start in our documentation site under support and documentation. And then templates. You can find a couple of these case management templates that reflect the structure that we're talking about. So the one that we're going to start with is the Protection Case Management Database, which is a fairly structured the model that follows the kind of standard case management model. You can click on this link here. Aruj, maybe you can put this link in the chat. And if you start, this will help you start a free trial account. So if I open this in an incognito window, or if you open this link, you might be prompted to create a trial account, and then we'll make a copy of the database that I'm going to share now that my colleague Faye put together. Do you see the database now in Activity Info? Okay, great. Okay, so in this database, this Activity Info database, the key form here is the case form. So just as we saw in the presentation, there's kind of one top level form. And within this top level form, you have several sub forms that provide more information, more detail about the case. So we would start with, a caseworker would start by adding a new record. In this database, the cases are organized by region. And I'm going to choose the caseworker. If I was a caseworker and not an administrator, I wouldn't be able to choose my caseworker. I have a separate form here for confidential bio data. That's a nice way to keep this separate from the rest of the form. So in this way, I might want to give my M&E team access to the other information so that they can look at statistics, they can track impact, but they don't necessarily need to see the personal information. So in this case, we have some registration numbers, and then the full name, the kind of basic biographical data that you would collect about a new case, contact phone numbers, etc. Let me jump back to one of the cases that I filled out. Tried to tell a couple stories here. So here in this case, we have let me go back. We have some details about an individual that's come for help about themselves. We have here you have a way to upload documents, including scans of documents if that's what you need, so that you have a record of that. In addition to the details of the case, um, some demographic information, for example, birth date, their current age, sex, the age group that their current age puts them in, as well as all of the other basic information. And then a case history. In this case, concerns about forced marriage. Who else is there, and the rest of these things, as well as a risk rating. And then there are separate forms for GBV. So in this case, forced marriage is a GBV issue. So we'll use today's date. Forced marriage as a category. These categories are of course up to you, and the information about the incident. Okay. So ActiveInfo has a mobile app. And that allows you for caseworkers to work in the field. So let's take a quick look at that. Let me tell my phone to pretend that it's my laptop to pretend that it's a, how do I do that again? Oh yeah, here we go. An Samsung. So in the mobile form version, one thing that sets ActiveInfo apart from other solutions for case management is that you have a complete replica of the database in your phone, at least the part that you have permission to access, which allows you to not only submit new case records but also to review other information, make changes in the form. So I can see the initial report here. Um, I can, it's not just about submitting records or submitting forms and updating the case. I can see all the details of the case from my phone, which allows me or as a caseworker to not only submit updates, but have access to that information that I need to best assist this person. All right, let me switch back here to desktop. And so in this case, you have these subforms. Each of these information can be filled out separately here, and then we can summarize that information in the main case file here. So for example, I have a calculated field that computes the status. Let's find that here. So, if you once you submit a closure, once there's at least one closure record, the case is considered closed. If there's no closure records, no closure form submitted, then it's open. Now, this is just a template. It's a good starting point, but if you go up here to form settings in the upper right-hand corner, this allows you to make changes to the cases, to the fields, to add new fields. So for example, if I need to know about nationality here, I could add a multiple select nationality and then add the different options that are relevant for my context. You can also create calculated values, as I mentioned. So here, for example, we're collecting the age of the person. In this formula, these are the same formulas you'd use in Excel. I've used today's date, but maybe a better way would actually to be use the date the case is opened. So let's see here. We've got the date the case was open. I'm just going to give that an open date. So we could also calculate the age of the person when the case was open, which for statistical purposes might be more useful because then the data is not going to change. So open date. Okay. We can also summarize the subforms. So if I want to know how many referrals or what the date of the last, like I have this action referral form here. It's this action here. So if I open up this subform, zoom out a little bit here, I can see I have a record of the date, the actions that were taken, as well as the date of the action or referral. So one thing that we might want to see is when was the last date of the referral. So we can add a calculated field to the main form. Just add a calculated field using the formula editor, and just find the maximum date of when was the last referral or follow-up. All right, so that would show me the last. You can also use the first and last functions to find, for example, what was their health status at the last follow-up, or what was the last comment during their case. Okay, you can find all the details here on the right. Of the case, as well as a full audit log, the history of all of these changes, when the record was added, when changes were made, if any, to the form. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the second template, which is this multi-case management. Let's see how this works. Let's go to the templates. Yeah, this is called this intensive multi-case team management. We're just going to create our own database based on this template. So case management demo 2. So I invite you to create a copy on your own if you'd like to follow along, or if you'd like to play with it afterwards. Let's just review what this structure looks like. So here, rather than nesting all of the kind of details about this, we've split these out as forms that reference the original case. But we still do have a backwards link, so we can see all the details of the case from this main one. So let's look at what this looks like. Now I have the 5 different forms. When I'm adding a new case, I add, as I did before, the biographical information, and date of registration, and save this. Now, once somebody's been added to the registry, then you might have other teams that are providing services like a distribution. So now I can refer to um, my case, my ID 001. I can also add a new case directly just using this link. It's kind of like a nested shortcut so that you don't have to go back out in the form and add a new one. Let's add, I'll say for case 001, I'm going to provide a data service provision. Say that we're going to provide some non-food items. We'll say a cooking set to ensure, well, just say a cooking set. Okay, so this allows us, for the team that's distributing goods, to see a full list of all of the goods that have been distributed. But we can also see this case, where we can reference this case for medical care. So if I need to have my health team record some assistance to this person, I can still reference case 001, track that they received a home visit, and record some notes on their blood sugar is a bit high, need to provide insulin supply post haste. Okay. So we save that. But I can still see all of this information together. So if I go back to my case, and I can see 001 here, I have a list of all of the services that this individual has been provided. I can see that they've received a distribution, so that non-food item and the cooking set, that we've got the medical care that this individual has received, and the whole history of this. And so you bring all of that information together, and you can have the same kind of case summaries here, statistics, if you want to see when the last time that they received medical attention, or if you're measuring health outcomes like blood sugar, you could provide the last uh, value based on from the medical care. Okay. So again, this is an approach that's useful if you have completely different teams working with the same group of beneficiaries, um, and you can give each team access to only the information that they need, and then they can build this out. So, for example, if I have my reference to 001, I have formal enrollment, and then I can add a record of the classes that they've taken. Let's say Rouge is my teacher. And then you can record progress on um, educational outcomes, track those over time, and so forth. And you'll have a full record of those classes here. So let's say for the next school year, Rouge is still the teacher, but now my reading scores and my math scores have gone up. Right. Okay, and so all of these references are visible here. Okay. So I think Aruj mentioned it, but there's a QA box on the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the QA box, and we'll reserve some time at the end to go through all of your questions and go into more detail um, at the end. All right. Do you see the slides again, Aruj? Okay. Um, so in the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about customizing roles and access to this data. I mean, with case management, obviously depends on the kind of services and populations that you're working with, but the information is generally quite sensitive. And as a general rule, we want to limit access to this data as much as possible. So some of the permission schemes that we see quite frequently, this is just a list. So the first thing is that you might want to limit caseworkers and supervisors to see their own records, right? So if you're working with an individual, you can see their record, but you can't see the data associated or belonging to another caseworker. Um, that's a useful way of keeping things in silos. Now, on the other hand, you might be working in a team to support a group of individuals, and in that case, limiting it to a specific caseworker wouldn't make much sense. You might instead limit it to teams, to specific types of cases. So, for example, you would have a GBV team; they're allowed to see the GBV-related cases, but not the child protection, and vice versa. You might be working with different partners who are all providing services to different individuals within the population. You could say that each partner is limited to seeing the records that belong to their partners, or by geographic area, or um, really with Activity Info. I mean, most systems you can define these criterias the way that you need to, and the way that meets your the requirements of your context. So let's dig in here and look at how you would apply these roles, at least in Activity Info. Let's start with the caseworker and supervisors. So I'm going to go back to my original template here for protection. I'm going to go to database settings and user. Okay, I'm going to have to make a copy of this, I think, because I don't have the rights to change roles. Okay, so Alex's copy. Okay, so now I'm the owner of the database, and if I go into this list here, I can see a couple of roles have been defined already. I'm just going to clear these out, and we can define these roles together for a couple of these scenarios. So the first one that we might want to define is a caseworker who's only allowed to see the records to which they're assigned. So what I can do here is I'm not going to assign manage users or manage roles. I'll grant resources to the protection cases form. And I'm going to specify the permissions for this form. So I'll say you can view all the records to start with, and you can add and edit records. I'm not going to allow caseworkers to delete the records, and I'm not going to allow them to export the records. We want to kind of keep the information in the system and avoid people exporting copies of the data to random laptops and random devices. Now, I also don't want to stick with view all records because I want to limit this to um, the cases where um, I am actually assigned to this. So what I can do is click on manage conditions. And for all three of these actions, I'm going to define a rule that the record is assigned to the user. Right? So you can only view, add, and edit when you're actually assigned to this record. And this is done by virtue of a user field. So if we look at the form design here, I have the caseworker field. This is a user type, so you're going to be selecting one of the registered users in the system. Right? This is this user field, and that helps make a relationship between the record and the user who's allowed to view it. So that's the first way to define a role for case management. Is we're going to limit these records um, to only being able to view records where you're assigned. I can also grant additional or different references. So for example, for reference data like position codes and supervisors, I'm just going to say you can view all of this data. That's not a problem. You don't need to see it in the list. You don't need to change anything. So I'll save that. And I'm going to allow you to see the dashboard or the reports folder, right? And then you can view that, but not make any changes. So you can set different you can set different permissions for different types of forms in your database. And we'll see that especially with the multi case management or multi-team case management template. All right, so now that would limit me to seeing only the cases to which I've been assigned. But on the other hand, you might have, like I mentioned, you might have people work in teams, and you want to do it more on the type of incident. So let's look at what it would look like if I define a role just for GBV, for gender-based violence team. So say this group, they're allowed to see all of the cases um, for the protection cases. I'm going to do something similar. I'm going to add, view, add, and edit. But my conditions are going to be different this time. So now I'm going to say, you're only allowed um, to do this when the category of the case, the protection category, is gender-based violence, right? So you can only see those records. You can also set this at the subform level, but since my subform on gender-based violence is only going to be visible when this is checked, that should be sufficient. But I can also customize. Maybe I want to make sure that you don't see the child protection form at all. I'm going to grant a specific permission on that resource. This is maybe important to note is that even though I'm granting resources, what I can actually do is also take away permissions for this subform. So for child protection, I'm going to take away permissions. And so for even though you have access to the protection case form, I'm going to make an exception for the child protection and take away your access. So that's a useful thing to do. Now, it could also be the case that we, as I mentioned, we're working in different geographic areas or with different partners. Both of those cases are going to have a similar approach. So let's make some changes to our form. I'm going to go into my reference data and add a new form to keep track of my partners. And so each partner is going to have a name, a key. We're going to make that the key field. And let me just add partner 1 and partner 2. So now I've got a list of my partners, and I can go back to my protection case. And now normally with this template, there's no relationship between um, the case and a partner. So we're going to change that. We're going to go to form settings and add a reference field. So a reference field is like creating a relationship between two forms. So I'll click on reference and choose from my reference data. I'm going to choose partners, right? So that you can select a partner. Each case, we're going to select one partner. Okay, I'm going to save this. And so now if I go back and edit a record, or if I add a record here, I'm going to choose, for example, a partner. So I'll say, okay, partner one, this case is associated with partner one. And in permissions, if I go back to database settings, I can now do something a bit more advanced with my roles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a role for partner caseworker. And I'm going to do something called, I'm going to create a parameter. And what's a parameter, you ask? Well, maybe I have 15 partners and I don't want to create one role for each partner, right? Because then I'd have like, okay, caseworker partner one, caseworker UNICEF, caseworker WHO, caseworker UNFPA. And that would take a lot of work. And I'd have to, if I wanted to make any changes to this caseworker role, I'd have to remember to apply it to each of these 15 or 20 or 300 roles. And that wouldn't work very well. So instead, what we can do is define a parameter. And that's a way of saying like, okay, I have one role, but when I assign users, I want to make it a little bit different for each user. I'm going to parameterize it and add a parameter called my partner, and link that to the partner form that I just created. Let's save that. So let's take a look at what happens when we assign a user to that role. So now if I assign a Rouge to this role, I'm going to choose partner caseworker. And this time, if I choose GBV team, then I'm done. I've defined my permissions. You know, Rouge has specific permissions that are defined in this role, and that's done. But if I choose partner, now I'm going to have to choose the partner um, that's involved, right? Or I'm going to choose the either partner one or partner two. And once I've defined that, then I can use this kind of variable or this parameter in the roles that I set. So now I can set a condition and say, okay, for protection cases, uh, yes, the partner caseworker can have access to that. You can display, you can add and edit records, but the condition that I'm going to set is going to be linked to that. So that record, this case, has to be related to the partner parameter. So if I say this is a UNICEF partner, then they can only see cases where UNICEF is listed as the partner, and they can only add cases. When they add cases, they can only select UNICEF. So now you can see this is set where conditions are met, add records where edit records, etc. All right. Now I can combine these things together. So I could say, well, you know what? I want a GBV partner role. So yes, you can only see records where, let's do child protection partner caseworker. Um, and I'm going to add a condition and say, well, you know, you can view when it's the record is related to your partner, and when the category of protection is um, child protection, for example. And so these two conditions both have to be met in order for you to um, be able to add or edit a record. Right. So this allows you to be very granular, and I really would recommend that you're as granular as possible, so that you just don't take the risk, right? Because every time you give people, human beings, access to data, um, you run the risk of user error, right? So people can make mistakes, they can change things that they don't need to change, but also the risk if somebody's account, if they write down their password on a sticky note and leave the sticky note on a bus, then you know then their account is compromised, then you limit the blast radius, let's say, of that mistake. So it's always a good idea to, especially for case management, to restrict the limit on a granular level, um, the yeah the the data that you allow people to see and change. All right. Let's look at one more example where we have this multi-team uh, setup here, where we have a centralized case, and then we have different forms for different teams. So here we can create a role essentially for each team. So I'll go back to database settings, roles, and I'll add, for example, a health team role. Now, this health team role, let's say that they're allowed to view all the records in the cases, because they have to be able to find and look up the person that they're providing the service to. But let's say that they're not responsible for registration, so we don't want them to add people to the list. Their only responsibility is to provide services to people who have been previously registered. So I'm not going to allow them to add or edit. I'm not going to allow them to export. So that's the permissions for the case form. And then I can also add permissions for the medical care form, right? Because they don't need to see the educational form or goods distributions or anything else, only the medical care form. And here they can add, edit um, records here without any conditions, right? Because this is all the data that you could add conditions, but we'll just say that the medical team is only allowed to view the records um, in this. So then they can see the case and the medical care form. We can do one more. Let's say we have an education team. The education team is allowed to view all the cases. Um, it's fine, no restrictions. And let's say that they also need to see the assessment. They need to view the information that's been collected by the assessment team. So we'll let them view that data. But it's really um, the educational enrollment form that we want them to contribute to. So here we'll add, edit, maybe even delete records here. Now deletion is risky. Okay. So this allows you to assign some people to the health team and others to the education team. And then they can both see the list of people that we're working with, but they can only see the activities that are related to their work. Okay. So we have some other webinars on permissions and roles, and some trainings by my colleagues Jarek and Victoria. Um, Rouge, maybe you can drop a couple links in the chat to those to help you get started on those. Great. Okay, so let's look at the last section of this webinar, which is reporting and analysis. So, um, what we've been looking at today is maybe what the caseworker would see. This is all information that a caseworker needs to have access to. But if we take a step back and think about how do we manage this program, like how do we make sure that services are being provided on time, how do we make sure that we're not forgetting people, that people aren't slipping through the cracks. That's one function where reporting and analysis is important. But also from an M&E perspective, how effective is this program? How many people are we reaching? How quickly can we resolve things? These are all questions that ActivityInfo can help you answer. And well, a case management information system can help you answer. So let's go back to this copy of maybe back to the copy that Faye had shared with me. So we've got our cases here, right? And so we have all of the details here. You can really read in depth what's going on. But maybe we need an overview, right? That focuses, that gives us some key numbers on how many open cases do we have? What's our caseload? If we have one caseworker here with 4 open cases, maybe that's not a good thing, and we need to redistribute the load. And what type of cases does our caseload consist of? These are all things that might help a manager to to ensure that operations are moving slowly, effectively, right? So if you see that we have a high number of at-risk cases, then we can get involved. Let's look at uh, you know at how you put these dashboards together. ActivityInfo has a nice dashboard editor that allows you to create different visualizations within the dashboard. I can see here that this number doesn't quite add up. If I've got 3 open cases and I'm assigned 4, then I've probably forgotten to do something. So let me go in and look here. Yeah, so you can see that I've just dragged a count of all the cases and broken it down by caseworker, but I haven't filtered out closed cases. So this is showing me all of the cases. So let's drag and drop case status onto the filter box, and I'm going to limit this visualization to the open cases. And this way, I'll see the caseload, the caseworker load, that only includes open cases. Okay, I can save that. The other thing that we might be interested in is whether a case um, is overdue, right? So if we have um, if we have a case where there's no, the medium risk level, but there's been no follow-up, that could be, something that we want to address. So let's go into the form, and what I'm going to do is, I believe we already have a summary here that is the last action or the referral. So let me scroll to the end. Yeah, so you can see we have a calculated field here that finds the last referral among our cases. So here, for example, this case, if I go down to action referrals, I can see that this was an issue of general protection of refoulement, and the representative met with the host government to address specific concerns and seek assurances that the individual will not be forcibly returned. Okay, great. So that means that we had the case was opened in November, and we had a referral shortly thereafter. So let's go ahead and add a calculated field to see what the duration, how long it's been since the case was opened, um, and make sure that we're not overdue. So here we have a last referral date that we've calculated from our form. Just that's the maximum date of all the referrals. Let's add a calculated field here. Open up my formula editor, and you can see on the left hand side here we have a list of the supported functions. We have this days function, which is going to find the number of days between, for example, today and the open date. This will give me the number of days open. But actually, we want to change this. We only want to see this. This is only relevant if the case status equals open. Otherwise it's closed, and then we don't have a date. So let's see if this works. Okay, so days open. So if we scroll to the end here, you can see that some of the cases were just open today, but this case has been open for 49 days, which might exceed our our desired level of assistance. So we can add to our dashboard. Let's go and add the average number of cases, number of time open. Just add here our pivot table. let's drag this field that I've just collected or just calculated, the number of days open as my measure. I don't want this to be a sum. I want to see the average. 16, and let's do that um, by risk level. Just drag and drop there. And you can see that we've had that the low priority cases, we seem to be fine. But the medium level, we have some cases that have been open way too long. So hopefully this will allow our programs manager to get involved and diagnose the issues. All right. So I'd like to stop here because I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. Let's see. I see we've got quite a few in the QA box, so I'm going to start with those. Okay, so it'd be nice if we give the mic to a couple of people. So Sarah had a question. Sarah, do you want to go ahead and ask your question live? Sarah? Yeah.
Hello.
Sarah?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Thank you very much. It's been really a very, very interesting presentation. And okay, I understand that this is, I mean, you introduce us to two ways or structures to manage this sort of case management. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was wondering if, based on your experience, do you think that I'm just thinking of what might happen in the project that I'm working with,
Yeah.
and working with the GBB, and that maybe within a single case there might be different sort of like I will call it reports within a case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe a case an individual that then there will be different situations reported, and then maybe we could like be using, or we could like be setting this up, setting up the system like we're gonna be closing individual sort of like reports within a
Right.
case.
Mm-hmm.
If do you, I mean, based on your experience, is that something that makes sense, or maybe just manage it as a, I mean, as a whole thing, the individual?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, especially in this kind of complex case management, you might have a single individual that you're working with for a longer period of time. I think the example that I was looking at is more um, kind of urgency driven. Like there's a report, like somebody comes to the hospital, and we want to kind of resolve or refer this person to services that they need as soon as possible, and then like we're like our role on the team is done. But like I think another scenario that's also very common is that you're working with survivors or individuals over a longer period of time, and that there might be several incidents that happen to these people or this person that each need to be dealt with separately, and that you don't want to just kind of close the case on them after you've solved the first problem and then kind of forget everything that you've learned in working with this individual during the first case, right? It has to be a cohesive process. So, like, I think if that's the case, then we could make. Let me go back to see if I can find my copy, the copy that I made here. Copy. Yeah. So what we could do is in this case, you could have the protection case. Um, and rather than having, I think I did something wrong here. Let me just remove this. I've got my region code. Get rid of this partner field. What we could do instead is add to the individual subforms, right? So then you might have, we could move some of this detail here, like the GBV incident, We could add more details here. So we could add the description of the incident here so that you could have multiple descriptions. Describe the incident, and then track a status essentially for each
one, right?
incident, right? So then this incident you could have like a status field here. So you'd say, okay, for this particular thing, it starts off as open, and I'm only going to close. I'm going to close this individual incident, even though the case is ongoing, right? Because they're still in that situation. Maybe they're still in the household where the incident occurred. Like the context hasn't been changed yet, but we were able to provide medical attention, or we were able to mitigate. We were able to do something to mitigate this specific incident, and then right.
Gotcha.
And then you could either keep the closure form on the, so then we say, okay, if you change it to close, then we'll also ask you to, right, so reason for closing this incident, and we'll make this relevant only if the status has changed to close, right? And you can have other information here. And then you could count at the main form for the individual level, how many open cases, like how many open incidents are there? And then either
Yeah.
close, right? So and I think that's why it's important to have this flexibility for case management, because it could be a big difference in your data structure, whether this is something you're working with people over a course of 6 months, or if this is really just emergency frontline strength. So that's a great question, Sarah. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much, Alex. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate this. Is really, really good. A great example. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Let me see. So, Yanni, you mentioned that you didn't see the roles option. Can you hear me, Yanni?
Yes. Hi, Alex. How are you?
Ya, muy bien, gracias. ¿Y tú?
Todo bien, muchas gracias.
Okay. So it sounds like you're not, like, just like I wasn't the owner of the database. So you probably have a role where you don't have the manage role permissions. So you have it, like if I have an administrator here, if I want to create an administrator, maybe I have somebody I want to just make a kind of a co-owner, or I want them to be able to do just about everything in the database along with me. The key one here is actually up here, manage roles. And if you don't give the person, or if you don't give that role the ability to manage other roles, then you won't see the roles, as you won't be able to change the roles. You want to be careful with who you give that permission to, because of course, then they can really do anything. That's probably the case where you're a trusted administrator. So you just need to ask the database owner to give you that manage roles permission. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Right. Let's see. Let me. Yeah, Mohammed Abdullah Abdo. Let me give you the mic, and you can ask your question. Go ahead and ask your question, Mohammed Abdullah.
Thank you, Alex, for the sharing this webinar. My question is, when a case receive two services during the period of the time, and the services are the same, how we can insert? If the services are different, we understood that is so
Sure.
easy. But if the service is the same service, for example, I have conducted a home visit twice during the period of time, during the period of the report.
Yeah, let's take a look at that. So in this copy here, let me go back to the multi-team case management. Or actually, I'll use the multi-team, this one here. Okay, so let's say that we have another form for home visit. And what you want to do is if you're going to be repeating the same service, you want to make sure that you have the right key field. So for example, you might be providing the same service, but the date is going to be different. So then you want to have a date field that tracks when this was provided. And then, they might be, current status. Let's do an example here where, let's say that we're providing inpatient or outpatient support for people with chronic diabetes, and we're measuring their blood sugar. This is not a super realistic example, but just as an example. And so this gives us a series of measurements over time, right? So I could say of course, I forgot my link to the case. That's important. So I have a reference to the case. So the same case is receiving home visits several times. So you can see what I've done here is that I've set two key fields. So the case and the date. That's the assumption here is that a case is not going to receive two home visits on the same day. If that's the case, if you did have multiple home visits on the same day or wanted to support that, then you could remove these key fields and there would be no constraint. But I'm going to add the constraint here just to make sure that we don't get duplicate data. But that means that I can go back and I can register that to me that case that I registered for 001. Maybe at the beginning of the month, we did a home visit, not checking blood sugar regularly, and the glucose level was like very high. It was like at 140. I think that's high. Right now, midway during the month, we came back, and we said, okay, patient is starting to more regularly check blood sugar, pay attention to diet. Now we're at, closer to normal, which I think is around 105. And maybe at the end of the month, let's say a patient is really doing well, observing best practices, blah, blah, blah. And we're still at like kind of an average, good, healthy blood sugar. Okay, so here, Mohammed, you can see I've got for the same case, I've got several, multiple home visits that can continue. If I go back to my case, I can add a reverse reference to bring that information together so that I can see for the home visit, all of the home visits for this case. And what I can also do is I can summarize this. So I might want to know how many home visits there have been, or I might want to know what was the last blood sugar that was measured. And so for that, I could add a calculated field, last measured glucose. And here I'm going to use the last formula or the last function. I'm going to take from my home visits. I want to know the last blood sugar. I'm going to define last by the date, right? So, even if I have to go back and add a new record because I forgot to record a home visit I did in July, it's still going to use this date here, the date of the visit as the value. So here you have. I have a summary. I can also go to my home visits here and see the list, and I can analyze, all of my home visits across all of my cases, and understand how many home visits did I do in each period. Does that make sense, Mohammed?
Yes, thank you. That's clear.
Okay, I'm gonna see if we can do one. We're a little bit over time, but I'd love to do one or more questions, one or two more questions. Let's see. We answered Mohammed's question. Okay, so I have two questions about duplicates here. So duplicates are indeed a tough thing to do, but we do have a couple of functions that are built in. So one is, and I mentioned this on the home visit here, is that the form settings, in the form settings here, you can choose key fields. And this will allow you to set some rules on what are the duplicates that are allowed. So in this simple case here, I had already recorded a home visit for patient 001 on the 1st of November. So if I tried to do another home visit or the same home visit on the same date, I'm going to get an error because a record already exists. So this helps to flag when duplicate values are entered. Now, of course, that doesn't help if people, I think Tao was talking about outright fraud or lying. Another tool that can be helpful is that when you register people, that you provide like cards or registration cards with QR codes. And in that case, we would go to form settings. We can add a barcode field to the case or a QR code that you scan when they're registered. So if I was on a mobile phone, let me switch to the mobile interface. It's going to prompt me to scan this. I could scan a barcode to scan the QR code issued to them, and then when services are provided, that barcode can be that card can be scanned again. Again, it's a tool that helps. There's no perfect solution that I'm aware of, but those are two tools that can be helpful. All right. I think we're going to have to wrap up because we're a bit over time. I do appreciate the great questions. Thanks for joining, and yeah, please try and use the go ahead and use the templates that Aru just shared in the link, and give the system a try yourself, and let us know if you have any questions. So, all right, take care, everyone.